Deep water. My grandfather's fishing boat, the Gullah Spirit, is older than I am. 43 years old, rebuilt twice. Repainted so many times the hull has its own history written in layers of marine paint and salt. In the memory of every storm we've survived together, I bought her from my grandfather when I was 20 to right after he had his first heart attack using money I'd saved from 3 years of commercial fishing in the waters off Miami and the Keys. The Gullah Spirit wasn't just a boat. She was my inheritance, my responsibility, my promise to my grandfather that this legacy wouldn't die with his generation. My name is Jackson Price. I'm 31 years old, third-generation Gullah fisherman, born and raised in Overtown, Miami. My grandfather came from South Carolina Gullah Geechee heritage, the culture that came from enslaved Africans who built the Sea Islands. My grandmother was born in Nassau. My father was a fisherman until he wasn't a back injury when I was 6 years old, and suddenly we were living on disability in my mother's nursing shifts. While my grandfather taught me how to read the ocean like a language, I know every current in the Atlantic. Between Miami and the Keys, I know which seasons bring the best mai-mai, where the tarpon run in July, how to read a storm coming 30 miles away by the way the water changes color. I know that commercial fishing is disappearing, the regulations, the quotas, the young people moving to the city where there's guaranteed paychecks and air conditioning. I know that I'm probably one of the last of my line, that when I'm gone, there might not be another Jackson Price who remembers how his grandfather taught him to fish. That's the weight I carry every time I take the Gullah Spirit out. So when I got the weather alert at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday in September category for hurricane, forming faster than predicted, landfall estimated in 72 hours, I did what my grandfather taught me to do. I checked the boat, secured the equipment, made sure the engine was running clean, and I started preparing for the worst. What I didn't expect was for someone to show up at my boat at 6:47 a.m. with a waterproof container full of research specimens and a face that told me he'd been awake all night. Jackson Price? The guy was tall, lean, dark-skinned with sharp features and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and cared about it anyway. He was wearing an NOAA research vest over a University of Miami t-shirt, carrying himself with the kind of careful precision that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and being terrified of failing at it. That's me. And you are? Dr. David Okonkwo, marine conservation biologist, Institute. I need to hire your boat. I set down the fuel line I was checking and turned to face him fully. Boat's not for hire. I'm preparing for hurricane season. I know. That's why I'm here. He held up the waterproof container. I have 12 years of research data on the Atlantic seahorse population specifically, a breeding colony that's critically endangered. The breeding season is in the next 72 hours, and the storm is going to destroy the seagrass beds where they spawn unless we relocate the specimens to a protected holding facility in Key West. Key West is in the opposite direction of where this hurricane is going. I'm aware of the geography. He was trying to sound professional, but I could see the tremor in his hands. I'm also aware that if I don't move these specimens, 12 years of research disappears and a species that was almost extinct gets pushed back to the edge again. I need a boat that can make it to Key West in rough water. Your boat is the only one in this harbor that hasn't already evacuated. I looked at the Gullah Spirit. She was ready for a hurricane, not for sailing through one. And this guy, this tall, desperate, brilliant-looking guy was asking me to do exactly that. How much are you paying? I asked, already knowing the answer. $15,000. I made that in a good month. Sometimes, when the catch was right and the regulations didn't change mid-season, $15,000 would cover my repairs, my boat insurance, my emergency fund for the winter when fishing slows down. $15,000 would mean I didn't have to worry about money for 3 months. $20,000. I said, I don't have $20,000. Then I guess you need to find another boat. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I have a credit card with a $15,000 limit. I can have it processed as soon as we get underway. By the time we reach Key West, you'll have the money. What's your name again? David Okonkwo. David, do you understand what you're asking? That hurricane is going to be a Category 4 when it hits. The Atlantic between here and Key West is going to look like a washing machine. I've done dangerous things on the water, but I've never done something this stupid. Neither have I." He looked directly at me, and I could see the full weight of what he was carrying. "But these seahorses are the last of their line. Just like your boat is probably the last of yours. I'm asking you to help me save something that matters." The way he said it, like he understood exactly what the Gullah Spirit meant to me, made me stop arguing. "We leave in 2 hours," I said. "You have 1 hour to get whatever you need. The other hour is for you to write down everything your family needs to know in case this goes badly." He didn't argue about the second part. That's when I knew this was serious. His name was David Okonkwo, born in Lagos, Nigeria. Came to the U.S. when he was 8 with his mother and older brother. His father stayed behind for work as structural engineer building hospitals in West Africa. David grew up in Miami, watched the ocean, decided at age 12 that he wanted to understand how it worked and how to save it. Got his PhD in marine conservation at 25. Been working at for 3 years, slowly building his seahorse research program with grants that never quite covered the full cost and personal funding that was running dry. He told me all this in the first hour while we were prepping the boat and loading his specimens into the climate-controlled cargo hold. He talked fast when he was nervous, his accent slipping in and out of Nigerian undertones when he got emotional. He had his mother's hands, he said, long fingers, always moving, and his father's stubbornness. He hadn't seen his father in 6 years because of visa issues and work schedules, and the kind of distance that builds between family members over time. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, securing his specimen containers. "Because if something happens out there, I want someone to know who I was. Not just the researcher, not just the credential." He met my eyes. The person that hit me differently than I wanted it to. By the time we cast off at 8:15 a.m., the sky was already changing. The light had that sickly yellow-green quality that comes before a storm. The water was choppy, not bad yet, but restless, like it was preparing for violence. My grandfather used to say the ocean talks to you if you listen. Right then, the ocean was saying, "Run." But we weren't running. We were sailing directly into the storm. "Tell me about the seahorses," I said once we were clear of the harbor, heading south toward Key West. "If we're going to risk everything for them, I want to know what we're saving." David emerged from the cabin with a laptop and pulled up his research. 3 years of data, population counts, breeding patterns, genetic diversity studies, habitat degradation analysis. He showed me the maps, the seagrass beds getting smaller every year, the pollutants, the fishing nets, the climate change that was slowly choking the ocean. "Seahorses are monogamous," he explained, and I could hear the passion beneath the science. "They mate for life. They dance together every morning. This specific movement where they link tails and move in synchronization. It's how they reinforce their bond." He pulled up video footage to tiny seahorses, impossibly delicate, moving together with perfect coordination. "They're not just surviving, Jackson. They're loving. They're committed. And we're destroying their world. So you save them because they mate for life?" "I save them because they matter. Because they're beautiful. Because they choose commitment in a world that's actively trying to kill them." He closed the laptop. "Is that a good enough reason?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." The storm started hitting us around 2 p.m. What had been choppy water became angry water, then dangerous water. The Gullah Spirit was built for this. She'd survived worse in my grandfather's hands. But she was working hard. The engine was screaming. The hull was taking abuse. And David was holding onto the rail with white knuckles, trying not to throw up while keeping his research specimens stable in the climate-controlled cabin. "Talk to me," I shouted over the wind. "Keep talking. Tell me something." "Like what?" he shouted back. "Like why you didn't evacuate with everyone else. Like why this research matters so much you'd risk your life." "Because my father builds hospitals to save people's lives. My mother is a nurse. She saves lives every day. And I'm supposed to save the ocean so there's something left for my children to inherit." He was crying now, wind and rain mixing with tears on his face. Because my whole family sacrifices everything and I'm the one who's supposed to make it matter. It matters. I reached over, grabbed his hand. Your research matters? You matter. But not if you die out here. Then help me not die. Help me get these seahorses to Key West. That's all I'm asking. I held his hand for 2 more hours while the storm raged. The wind gusted up to 80 miles per hour. The waves were 12, 15, 18 feet. The Gullah Spirit handled it like she was born for this because she was. My grandfather designed her for rough water, built her for memory and stubbornness, and the knowledge that the ocean doesn't care how good you are, only how prepared. At 4:47 p.m. David's phone buzzed with a weather update. We were in the outer bands now. The hurricane had accelerated. Landfall was 48 hours, but we were already in Category 3 conditions. We're not going to make it to Key West, David said, staring at the message. Yeah, we are. Jackson, the storm is moving south faster than we can sail south. I know, so we're not sailing south. We're sailing east, into deeper water, then south. Longer route but slower current. That's insane. Probably. I adjusted the heading. The boat responding to my hands like it knew what we were doing. But my grandfather did something similar in 1997 during Hurricane Georges. Took a much longer route, but kept his boat safe. The Gullah Spirit knows how to dance with storms. David came to stand next to me at the helm, one hand on my shoulder for balance. Tell me about your grandfather. Later. Right now I need to focus. Then talk about him. Tell me while you're focusing. It helps me not panic. So I told him about my grandfather coming from South Carolina, about learning to fish from him at age 4. About watching him navigate the water like it was his second language. About him teaching me that the ocean will kill you if you disrespect it, but it will also save you if you understand it. About his heart attack and the way he taught me everything he knew in the 3 months. Before I took over the Gullah Spirit. He sounds incredible, David said. He is. He had the first heart attack, but the second one, I didn't finish. Just adjusted the heading again. When? 2 years ago. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. We sailed through the night. David stayed at the helm with me, not helping because he didn't know how, but being present. Talking when I needed to hear a voice. Quiet when I needed to focus. At 2 a.m., when the worst of the wind hit, he made coffee in the cabin's tiny galley and brought it to me in a thermos. At 4 a.m., he fell asleep standing against the cabin wall, and I moved him to the small bunk below deck. By dawn on Wednesday, we were in deep water, east of the storm's path, approaching the point where we could turn south toward Key West. David woke up to find me still at the helm, 44 hours without sleep, running on adrenaline and the specific kind of focus that only comes from knowing someone else's life depends on your hands staying steady. You need to sleep, he said. Can't. Storms. Still too close. Then let me take the wheel. Tell me what to do. You don't know how to sail, but you do, and I can follow instructions. Jackson, he put his hand on my arm. You saved my research. You saved me. Now let me save you from falling asleep and crashing this boat into the ocean. I was too tired to argue, too tired to do anything but show him the basics, how to hold the heading, what the instruments meant, when to alert me if something changed. He was surprisingly competent for someone who'd never sailed before. Careful, focused, willing to learn. I slept for 3 hours in the bunk, and when I woke up, David had everything exactly as I'd left it. The heading was perfect. The engine was running clean. He'd even made more coffee. You're a natural at this, I said. Taking the wheel back, I had a good teacher. He smiled at me, and something shifted in my chest that had nothing to do with the storm. We reached Key West at 6:15 p.m. on Wednesday, 37 hours after we left Miami. The hurricane was still 90 miles away, but the conditions were already deteriorating. David's colleagues were waiting at the Marine Research Facility, a small concrete building on the harbor that housed the emergency preservation tanks for his seahorse colony. We unloaded the specimens together. David's hands were shaking, whether from the storm or the relief, I couldn't tell. His colleagues were congratulating him, asking about the journey, celebrating that the research had made it through. And David kept looking back at me like I was the only important thing that had happened. Come inside, he said. Get some food, rest. The storm won't hit for another day and a half. The Gullah Spirit needs maintenance. The engine took a beating. Jackson, I have to check the hull for stress fractures. Make sure she's ready for the evacuation protocols. It'll take 6 hours, maybe 8. He wanted to argue. I could see it in his face. But he also understood that I wasn't leaving her. The boat was as important to me as the Seahorses were to him. Then I'm helping, he said. For the next 8 hours, while the sky darkened and the wind picked up, David helped me maintain the Gullah Spirit. He didn't know how to do any of it, so I taught him how to check the hull for damage, how to test the engine, how to secure the rigging for hurricane-force winds, how to talk to a boat like it was a living thing that needed respect. He was a fast learner. By our 4, he could identify stress fractures. By our 6, he was securing the rigging without instructions. Why are you learning this? I asked as we worked. Because you matter, he said simply. And this matters to you. So it matters to me. Around 10 p.m., we finished. The Gullah Spirit was as hurricane-ready as she could be. We sat on her deck, legs dangling over the water, watching the storm approach like we were watching the end of the world coming in slow motion. What happens to your boat? David asked. She stays here. The facility has hurricane-rated moorings. She'll be fine. And you? I fly out tomorrow morning. Got a hotel room in Fort Lauderdale until the storm passes. Then I come back and assess the damage. What if there's major damage? Then I fix her. That's the job. What if she's destroyed? I didn't answer right away, because that was the thing I didn't let myself think about. The Gullah Spirit was older than me. She could break, could be destroyed. And then what? Then I'm a Gullah fisherman with no boat, no legacy, no way to keep my grandfather's promise. Then I figure out what comes next, I said finally. But I don't plan for failure. My grandfather taught me that. You prepare, you do everything right, and then you trust that the preparation was enough. Do you ever just, David paused? Do you ever just let someone help you? Or do you always have to be the one carrying everything? That's not fair. It's completely fair. You took me to Key West through a hurricane. You risked your boat, your life, your legacy. And now you're sitting here talking about acceptance like you didn't. Just do the bravest thing I've ever seen. I got paid. No, you didn't. We established that $15,000 wouldn't even be processed until we arrived. And I haven't made the transfer yet because I've been helping you maintain a boat I don't own and don't fully understand. He turned to face me. You did this because my research mattered to you. Because I mattered to you. You met me 6 hours before we cast off, and you risked everything. You risked everything too. I'm a scientist. Calculated risk is my job. But you're a fisherman who could have turned me away and nobody would have blamed you. You chose to help. The wind was picking up now. The storm was getting close. And David was looking at me like I was the most important thing in his world. Which was insane because we'd known each other for less than 36 hours. If I kiss you right now, I said carefully, is that a crisis decision or a real one? Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Then wait, he said. Kiss me when the storm passes. Kiss me when we've both survived. Kiss me when it's a real choice and not an emergency. I wanted to argue with him. But David was right. This was crisis chemistry, adrenaline. The intensity of shared danger making everything feel more important than it was. Okay, I said. When the storm passes. The hurricane hit Key West at 3:14 a.m. on Thursday with sustained winds of 125 miles per hour. David and I were in the Marine Research Facility, monitoring the specimen tanks, making sure the backup generators were holding and the climate control stayed stable. His colleagues had evacuated to Miami. It was just us, his Seahorses, and the storm that was trying to tear the building apart. The western wall is leaking, David said at 5:30 a.m., pointing to water seeping through the reinforced concrete. We need to move the tanks. The generators are on the eastern side. If we move the tanks, we lose power. If the wall collapses, we lose everything. He was right. We spent the next 2 hours moving 1,600-liter tanks filled with endangered seahorses from the western wall to the eastern section of the facility. The building was shaking. The wind was screaming. And David worked like he was saving the entire ocean instead of 12 SEHO or SES. At 7:47 a.m. The western wall cracked. Not catastrophically, but enough that we knew we made the right call. David looked at the damage and then at me. "Thank you," he said. "Storm's not over." "I know, but I needed to say it now. In case," he didn't finish, "in case we don't get another chance." "Yeah." I pulled him close. Not a kiss, not yet, but a hug that said I'm here, and I'm not leaving, and when this is over, we figure this out. He held me like I was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. The hurricane peaked at 9:15 a.m., Category 4, exactly as predicted. The building held. The tanks held. The specimens held. And David and I sat in the center of the facility, surrounded by seahorses in their tanks, and talked about everything. About his father in Lagos, about my grandfather in the ground, about the ocean and what we owed it, about second chances and finding someone who understands why you risk everything for the things you love. When this is over, David said, I want to know you. Not crisis you, real you. The guy who teaches people how to maintain boats and tells stories about his grandfather and thinks about legacy. Okay, I said. When the storm passes, the storm weakened by late Thursday afternoon. Category 3, then 2. By Friday morning, it was tropical storm status, moving back out to sea. The Gullah Spirit had survived with only minor damage, some of the rigging torn, a few stress marks on the hull, but fundamentally sound. My grandfather's boat had made it through. David's seahorse colony had survived completely intact. The specimens were fine. The research data was safe. Everything he'd risked for had come through. At 11:47 a.m. on Friday, when the last of the storm bands were moving away from Key West, David kissed me. For the first time since we met, not in crisis, not in adrenaline, but in calm and daylight, with the ocean finally peaceful between us, I felt like I was falling. He said, and you caught me. I felt like the ocean was trying to kill us, I said. And you made me want to live. Poetic. My grandfather was Gullah. We're poetic people. My father is Yoruba. We appreciate poetry. He kissed me again. What now? Now I don't know. I live in Miami. You live in Miami. We both have jobs that are insane. You study seahorses. I fish. This is probably a disaster. Probably, he agreed. But I like disasters. They're honest about what matters. I laughed. That's the dumbest thing you've said since I met you. You like dumb. I do, actually. After 6 months, David rented an apartment in Overtown, close to my house. His research program got expanded funding. Turned out that a scientist who'd risked everything to save his data got a lot of attention. He gave a TEDx talk about seahorse conservation and the importance of protecting seagrass beds. It went viral. He was suddenly one of the leading voices in marine conservation, getting interviews with NPR and speaking at environmental conferences. But every weekend, he was on the Gullah Spirit, learning to fish. Not for commercial purposes, for understanding. He wanted to know the ocean the way I knew it. Wanted to understand why my grandfather had chosen to spend his life on water instead of land. I taught him everything. How to read the currents. How to predict the fish behavior. How to navigate by stars in watercolor and the specific way the air smells before a storm. He was a terrible fisherman, couldn't keep his balance on the rolling deck, threw up regularly, and had a tendency to overthink every decision, but he was trying. Why do you do this? I asked him one Saturday, watching him attempt to untangle fishing line. You could be in a lab somewhere, getting grants, publishing papers. Instead, you're out here getting seasick and hating every minute of it because you're out here. He said simply, because your grandfather's legacy matters to me now. Because the ocean matters to me now. Because we survived a hurricane together, and that means something. It means we're both insane. Probably. But we're insane together. 1 year after the hurricane, I took David back to Miami and proposed on the Gullah Spirit. We were exactly where we'd started on the boat, on the ocean, but this time we were still. The water was calm. The sky was clear. My grandfather told me before he died that he wanted me to find someone who understood the ocean. The way I did, I said, kneeling on the deck. I didn't understand what he meant until you showed up with your seahorses and your desperate eyes, and your willingness to risk everything. You understand it now. You understand me. Will you marry me?" David said yes, and then he cried, and then he kissed me while the sunset turned the water gold. 2 years after the hurricane year, wedding was at the Marine Research Facility in Key West. David's mother came from Miami. His father flew in from Lagos first time in 6 years. My cousins came from South Carolina. We had a ceremony that mixed Gullah traditions with Yoruba blessings, and we exchanged vows that we'd written together on the deck of the Gullah Spirit. "I vow to understand your ocean," David said, "to learn your language, to build a legacy with you that matters. I vow to care about your seahorses," I said, "to protect the ocean for them and for us, to trust you the way you trusted me during that hurricane." My grandfather was gone by then, the second heart attack. 2 months before David showed up, but I felt him there. Felt him knowing that I'd found someone who understood, that the Gullah Spirit would sail again, but now with 2 people who loved her, that the legacy would continue, just differently. David's research saved the seahorse colony. Within 3 years, the population tripled. He published his findings in major journals. He consulted for international marine conservation efforts. And every weekend, he was still terrible at fishing on the Gullah Spirit, but he kept trying. Because that's what love is, I think. Not the crisis moment where you risk everything. That's survival. Love is the quiet work of learning someone's world when it would be easier not to. Love is showing up every weekend to be terrible at fishing because the person you love loves fishing. Love is taking a 43-year-old boat and making sure she'll sail for another 43 years. Love is understanding that legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build together. My grandfather taught me to fish. David taught me that you don't have to fish alone. And the Gullah Spirit, my inheritance, my promise. My heritage sailed on with 2 people who understood that the ocean was sacred. That seahorses mated for life. That some things were worth risking hurricanes for. Some things were worth everything. Asterisk epilogue. 5 years after the hurricane, I'm sitting on the deck of the Gullah Spirit with my son Jackson David Price, age 3, terrified of the water but obsessed with the fish. David is below deck, making lunch in the galley, singing badly in a mix of English and Yoruba. The sun is setting. The water is calm. The boat rocks gently under my feet like she's singing too. My grandfather would recognize this moment. The boat in the water. Family on board. Legacy continuing. But he never knew it would be like this. Beautiful and unexpected, and worth every hurricane we'll weather together.